90 minutes together, 90 minutes. And it's all about the webcam call and multiple people on the call, multiple people on the call. I'm your host for the next 90 minutes, Bob Spence. I'm an international business development specialist. You may see me from time to time on the UK Department of International Trade seminars, webinars, but today, absolutely terrific, Humber Business Growth Hub in association with the Northern Powerhouse in the European Union. I would like you to be aware of Menti, menti.com, menti.com, because you know what's going to happen. We're going to have a little bit of a quiz. And when we have that quiz, if you put menti.com into your phone, and we're going to have a quiz. So that's something that's going to happen. The actual subject matter today, the subject matter is multiple people on a call, multiple people on a call. So we'll cover the 1-to-1, the 1-to-2, the 2-to-1, the 2-to-2, and the +4. So we've got a few variations. We'll also get through winning moves the following. There'll be a one-page synopsis of webcam tactics, 7 communication action list, and some pre-call material. So that will be coming out on Wednesday. And that's going to come to you via Winning Moves. Winning Moves will be emailing that out. Additional information, additional value, additional legacy from this session. That's what a 1-to-1 looks like. That's one person talking to one person. And then we have, now there's someone on the call. And if I could trouble you to mute your microphone, that would be fantastic. If you could mute your microphone, that would be terrific. All right, fantastic. So we've got the 1-to-1, we've got the 1-to-2. So that's when you're addressing 2 people. Then we've got the 2-to-1, when there's 2 of you addressing 1 person. And then you've got the 2 versus 2. And then we've got all the different combinations of above 4. So that's what we're going to be looking at over the next 90 minutes. There'll be slides, there'll be takeaways if you've registered, and that's all courtesy of Winning Moves and Humber Business Growth Hub. So let's start off with menti.com. Let's start off with that. And what you do, so if you can put on your phone and go to menti.com. If you could go to menti.com, that would be a joy. It will be a joy. Maybe I'm exaggerating there, but I'm an optimistic person. So we've got menti.com, and it comes up as join a presentation, and you've got the code there, 339817. So let's put that in, 339817, and we'll submit that. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the actual quiz in here. Look at that, modern technology side here. How did we ever live without all this stuff? So what you've got is a list there. You've got a list, and in ascending order, put in which of these affects you the most. That should be the question. Let me just double check, because I have some fun with this. That's right, I know. I have some fun with this. So let's make sure we're on the right one. Look at that. Present it. So let's go back. So what it should come up, it should ask you, all things being equal, which of these affects you the most? Okay, and we've already got some comment there. So you can put in ascending order. So choose which ones affect you the most. Which of these types of call affect you the most? Which ones have the most impact on how you go about things? So you can rank all 5 of them. So there you go. And then you apply them. So waiting for a few more responses there. Waiting for just a few more responses. And I can see we've got something in the chat box, which is pretty cool. Like a bit of chat. What was the code? 339817. 339817. 339817. Okay. So anybody, I still think we're waiting for for one more on this. But I think it's so far it's pretty clear that the larger calls are the ones that are giving us the most grief. The larger calls, and you'll be delighted that it's the larger calls that I'm going to be focusing on. Look at that! I must have known. I must have guessed. I must have guessed it would be the larger calls. All right. Well, let's just put Menti back over here, and let's get back into the session. So there's going to be 2 Q&A opportunities, one after 45 minutes, and I'm keeping the time. And you can use the chat box to communicate to our host. And our host today is Sadia. She's our host. So if you put in a comment there, I'll be looking for it. And if needs be, she can ask questions over her microphone, if needs be. So let's have a look. So we'll just have a little look at the technology we've got. You know where the chat box is. You can see that. You can see the arrow there. If you want to send a chat out to everyone, that's cool. So if you feel you want to tell everyone that this is a great session and isn't it terrific, Bob Spence is hosting it, don't let me stop you doing that. If you feel you need to do that, do that. Mute your microphone and you can put a reaction in. You can put a reaction in where you see fit. So, crikey, 7 minutes in, so I better get into it. I better get into this. Lordy, lordy. Starting point. Well, let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back in time a little bit. And I'm going to go back in time a little bit and just point out some basic information for everyone to consider. When I first left further education, my first role was in the bank. In a bank, it was Barclays Bank back in the day. And the bank at that time, first entry skill they gave you was telephone technique, how to answer a call in a business-like manner, that represented Barclays Bank, how to handle a business call that met the needs of a Barclays customer, client, prospective client ringing in. And I can remember it was 3 days of how to develop telephone technique. Nothing surreptitious, nothing Machiavellian around it. It was just the basics of business communication via the telephone. So that's recognized as a thing. And even today, telephone technique is recognized as a thing, as a skill. Everyone on this call knows when we've been on the telephone with someone that's highly skilled at communicating via the telephone. We know it by the way they respond to our questions, the way they post their questions, the way that they listen, the way they feedback information, the way they double check that they've understood what you've said. So we know that telephone technique, it is a thing. It's a real thing. The second thing that when I left university, it was a long time ago, I can tell you, was the use of the written word, working for Barclays Bank. And again, a program of how to use the written word, how to respond to correspondence, how to frame arguments, how to put things into a logical order, what kind of language and words you should use when you're trying to communicate and reach out, the different styles of letter. You're responding to a new customer or to an existing customer, or you're writing to a customer to acknowledge something that needs doing, or you've acknowledged that they've written to us, or even very rarely to acknowledge they weren't happy with something the bank had done, but it was recognized as a thing. Recognized as something tangible. You could tell the difference between someone that had written a good business letter and a letter that was just mass correspondence from someone, because it lacked those little cues, those little light touches within the communication that generated empathy. So that was recognized as a thing. And those of us that are involved in business development, we know for sure that your telephone technique and use of the written word will separate you from other people. The next thing was to think about, well, one-to-one, face-to-face skills. And again, it's the thing, it actually is a skill. And another 3-day program, it might have been 6, it's that long ago. But it was how to present yourself, the etiquette at a first meeting, body language, eye contact, firm handshake, when to pose questions, when to react to questions, how to answer questions, how to close things off, how to look for feedback, how to create feedback from the client, from the prospect. It's a skill. And again, anyone on the call whose background is business development will know it's a key skill. You can definitely see the difference between someone that's skillful and that's been trained and someone that hasn't. And then the final one was group meetings. So we were educated in the bank that if you had to take a client or a couple or a business into the boardroom where there were multiple people in the room, and multiple meant more than 2. That's what we were trained to do. So you know that you need to be making eye contact with different people that are in the room. You need to engage with different people in the room. You need to make sure that every single person is going on the journey of that piece of communication. You need to reach out to people, remember people's names, remember their role in the meeting, remember who's the person that seems to be engaged, remember who was the person that wasn't, remember to take notes, remember to make eye contact, remember to look and try and read how they're responding to the information that you've shared with them. And in a group meeting, it's very different than a one-to-one. It's very different. It's a very different skill. Now, these 4 introductory items are all recognized as skills. They are skills. They are skills that you can learn. They are skills that you can develop. They're not particularly an art form, although some people are better at it than others, but they are very robust skills, very robust sets of skills. It is something that you can learn. It is something you can develop, and it is something that can be flexible. And that was then. That was then. That was then. That was then. As those who've been on my other calls know that I always recommend reading material. So this is the first one. It's called nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication. They're not likely to make a movie of it, I can tell you that. But in these different times, it's well worth a read. And I'll show you who this guy is, Professor Merabian. I'll show you who he is. And this is his framework. And I believe there'll be people on the call who says, oh, so that's what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is. Professor Merabian came up with this. This is his theory, his framework, that 7% of communication is verbal and it's delivered by the content. 38% of communication is sound and it's delivered by the tone of the voice. 55% of communication is suggested by the body. So those on the call that already remember that or have been shown it, and it comes up all over the place, he's the guy, Professor Albert Merabian, he came up with it. And it works like this. So if you think of those 3 variables, what's being said, how does it sound, and what's the body language behind it. So if I said to you, we're all really interested, even through a webcam, those 3 things, you tick the box because you can read it. I'm saying we're all really interested. I'm sounding like we're all really interested. And by the way I'm leaning into the camera and using my hands, it suggests that we're all really interested. Now let's try that another way. If I was to say, we're all really interested. You see, it doesn't quite have the same ripple. It doesn't quite have the same ripple. And we're going to investigate this. It's called reading digitized body language. Lordy, lordy, this is the world that we're in. the world of digitized body language. And we're going to explore this over the 90 minutes we've got together. So in the United Kingdom, we still have that 7% is verbal. We still have the inflection of the voice, although it gets twisted a little bit in webcam, which I'm going to talk to you about. And the rest of it, it's now digitized because you're dealing with headshots and people staring blankly into the camera. So where does this material come from? And I'm going to share this with you because you'll find that anybody that spent a lot of time in the Southern Hemisphere or is from the Southern Hemisphere will already have a handle on this. And I'll share with you why. So here we have, you can see it, England. And in England, we have 432 people per square mile. So let's go into the Southern Hemisphere side here. Let's have a look. That's where I'm from. Those of other people from South Africa, I'll say, how is it with you? In South Africa, we've got somewhat less. And we also have a different kind of business culture, too. Australia, where I worked when I was working out of Hong Kong, what do they have? Now, you will find that folk from New Zealand, Hong Kong, Australia, South Africa, we jumped on the webcam very, very early, very early. Australia, well, business meetings more often than not are done through a camera because of distance. South Africa, sadly to say, we are spread out, but it's a little bit violent, my hometown. So people quite often would rather do business through the webcam when they are able to. And certainly when I was living and working in Hong Kong, dealing with Chinese companies, dealing with Australia, there was only one way you're going to make that happen without a few air miles, through the camera. So this material comes from the Southern Hemisphere, and the Southern Hemisphere already had these rules of communication, recognizing that more than half of what you're doing is now digitized. Now, if you get your head around that, it's quite likely, not just for this year, not just next year, but it is quite likely that a significant percentage of our communication is going to be digitized going forward. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is people are now in the habit of doing it. That's one thing. They're in the habit of doing it. You've got different cultures within the population. I'm thinking about the millennial culture, the Generation Z culture, who are more likely to jump onto a camera call than they would for a face-to-face anyway. You have the pandemic. I'm not an expert on that. I'm an expert on what it's done to me, but not when it's going to end. But there's a lot of feeling, especially in the big cities, that people are used to home-based working, and the operating costs of home-based working are making it very attractive to shareholders. So there are reasons to presume that when this does reboot, it won't reboot back to exactly where we were this time last year. So think in terms of whatever you're going to do through a camera, whatever you're going to do, that is probably what's going on. It's probably what's going to go on. And start to consider, or we're going to consider as a group, but what does this mean? What does this mean? What can we do about it? What can we do differently? And that's what I'm going to cover. That's what I'm going to cover. That's what I'm going to cover. You'll see here an amount of numbers. It comes from CV Library, which is a leading brand, and it was taken from remote working professionals, and they had nearly 6,000 respondents to a fantastic questionnaire, a terrific questionnaire. So that only happened in April. So in April, the people that responded, that's what they said. That's what they said. My understanding is they're going to do another one in April, so it'll be interesting to see how everyone feels. But that's where people were in April. I think this is a key piece of information. Now, I would like to share with you that the word abandon doesn't necessarily mean come off the call. Abandon could mean that they're on the call, but they're not really on the call. They're disengaged from the call. They're not actually there. They're physically logged on, but they're not actually in the meeting. And those are high figures. And these are remote working professionals. Remote working professionals. At that point, that was the feedback from the people that they interviewed. And so getting your head around webcam use, it's here to stay. If I just go back to the start of it, when I was saying, well, we know that the telephone is a thing, telephone technique's a thing, and we know that writing correspondence is a thing. We know that, whether it's e-correspondence or hard copy. And we know that meeting someone face-to-face, one-to-one, that's a thing. And we know that being able to run a multi-person meeting is a thing. This is a thing as well. This is a thing as well. This is a thing. It is a skill. I don't think that many people have been trained on it. So even if you improve your skills by 2% or 5% or 10, you're going to make a quantum jump compared to other people. What I'm going to do, Sadia, is come back to this particular quiz. I think I'm going to drop that in a little later on, if that's all right, Sadia. I just want to go through some more of this first, and I'm watching the time as well. I've got some more information to share with you, and it comes from 3 environments. One's CV library. The second is gong.io. And then I was responsible for a large poll that was delivered via C40i, which is Center for Digital Innovation, but I did it in association with Barclays Eagle Lab. So we had quite a number. We had 2,800 respondents. Let's have a look at this information, because this information, if we can answer these questions, this is going to alter what you do anyway, before I get onto anything. So here's some basic questions. How long should an online meeting last? We're going to search for what is the optimum. Now you've got, how long should an online presentation last? So you're on a team meeting and you're going to make a presentation. How long should it last? And then we've got, well, what's the best agenda order? And the reason I'm going to put this out there, it's all changed. And I'll show you what it's changed to and how to do it. Length of a meeting. Okay, this came from CV Library. We know it's across 60,000 people. Sorry, 6,000 people. Whoa, I bet they wish it was 60,000. 6,000. So there we go. That's what they reckoned. 55% of that nearly 6,000 said that. That's what they reckon. That's what they reckon. And I think it's a major consideration that when you're having a meeting, regardless of your skill, regardless of your ability, and regardless of the empathy you and your team have, I think it's a major consideration. Well, should we map what we're going to do against a specific time frame? The next 19% said 30 to 45 minutes. And then you can see here, that's what 15% thought. That's what 6%. And I have no idea what that 5% do. I've got no idea. I even wanted to write in and say, with those spoof responses, I mean, who the dickens wants a 2-hour online meeting? But hey, 5% of 6,000 said that they did. So, you know, who am I to criticize this on a recording? Hey, okay. So I think the first thing to consider is this. If 74% of respondents, which is 30 up to 45 minutes, are saying that that's what they think, I certainly think that that is something that you should take away from this session, because I'm going to be showing you tactics and methodology, and you're going to have to use that and deploy it for 45 minutes. Now, for the record, I do business development. I do business development between the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, Czech, Slovak, and Hungary. And most of that was done face to face. As soon as I got this information, I dropped what I was doing directly into 45 minutes. 45 minutes. I've been training people with the United Kingdom Department of International Trade, and I'm also part of the Chartered Institute of Procurement, where we're trying to work out what's the best length of time for a buy-in session, and everybody's coming back with 45 minutes. So you can ignore this, of course, but I would suggest to you as a learning outcome, think 45 minutes, and in fact, it's less. If you think the first 5 minutes is preamble and the last 5 minutes is wrap up, you've probably got 30 to 35 minutes where the action actually takes place. So I would think like that to start with. What length of presentation should we use? Well, this is a company that I consult for over in America. So there's no reason why you'd be familiar with it. And I think what's pretty interesting is that they were able to use diagnostics around that. Now, I know that this is not a software as a service session. I know that. And I know that it's probably unlikely that there's anyone on this call who does software as a service demonstrations. But what they were doing was analyzing presentations. So not sales presentations, demos, presentations, feedback to clients. And this is where this information came from. So it's quite mechanical, and there's the figure. If you're going to present anything, so let's say you've got 45 minutes, which we now know means 35 minutes. 9 minutes is the optimal amount of time to present something, If you're going to present something, that's the figure. I've been using that theory in larger meetings, and I'm going to share with you a bit later on that you're probably wiser to try and put the best information you've got right at the front of the call. So I'm going to explain how to do that. And that's not for sales, that's just in general. It's just in general, because there's, it's called deterioration engagement. Wow. Try and imagine saying that. Deterioration engagement. My accent certainly doesn't lend itself to it. Deterioration engagement. What's actually happening is the way people are listening to what it is that you're doing, it goes through the floor, through a webcam. I mean, for those on this call, and I'm sure there are, that, you know, in a face-to-face meeting or a multiple person meeting, have got good interpersonal skills, great soft skills, probably one or two really funny anecdotes, all that good stuff that you normally use to keep a meeting moving along, that turns to dust through a camera. It turns to dust through a camera. And not only that, you can't even read exactly what's going on. So let's have a little browse through some more of this, and then we're going to do a quiz. And then, Sadia, we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A. You know I like a Q&A, Sadia. You know that. So the first thing to consider, regardless of the length of the call, is the agenda order. And so it's kind of beginnings and endings. And there's a whole body of information that, because of this deterioration of engagement, to lead with the most important information first. Now, you might do that anyway in a meeting, but not everyone will. Sometimes people start a meeting in a specific format that the company has laid out, and I get that. Sometimes people can start a meeting with some kind of preamble to set the scene. I get that. Sometimes there's small talk at the start of the meeting to engage people and to get buy-in and just to get the flavor of the meeting. All of that is good stuff. However, on a webcam, it just takes so much longer. So, for example, if we had 6 meetings on a call and I said to Sadia, okay, we're going to do a round robin and see how everyone is. So one person after the other is speaking. You're not really in control of that, and you'll start to get attention drift, and you'll start to get people looking at their own technology, because mostly people don't engage so much through a camera as they would in a room. In a room, you would demonstrate that you're actually empathizing and engaged with what someone's saying, although it doesn't affect you. Whereas through a camera, people are less inclined to do that. So where it's possible and appropriate, try and put your headline in at the start. When I do sales training through the webcam, it's almost like if you think of a joke, which is quite a sophisticated thing to get right. There's an order of a joke. You know, you set the scene, you get buy-in, you tell a little story, and there's some kind of punchline that makes sense because of the context. Well, in this environment, think in terms of what kind of punchline can you put in before you put in the context. It's almost like telling the punchline before you've told the joke. Try and think that way around, rather than it's some kind of meeting where it builds up to all of the good news. And this is what came out of the Eagle Lab information. One thing was, because attention span deteriorates so drastically through a camera, and it just does. I don't actually vote in the United Kingdom, so what I'm about to say couldn't be politicized in any way. I think that all of us have heard or seen politicians from every shade of the Houses of Parliament say whatever they've got to say. Our attention spans are deteriorating because we're almost numbed and dulled into whatever's going to be on this newscast tonight. It's not going to be good news, and the response to it by the other folk, that's not going to be good news. And attention spans have gone. I did a presentation 2 weeks ago, and again, this isn't a politics. It was a clip where Neville Chamberlain, now Neville Chamberlain was the British Prime Minister in 1939. In 1939, and Neville Chamberlain had a BBC broadcast. He had a broadcast to the nation, and it was pretty serious. He was actually announcing that we were going to war. So it's pretty serious. It was pretty serious. Now, if you ever look at that clip and listen to how it was being explained and what he was saying and on the content and so on, I mean, the first thing is you could say, okay, different times. But if he was doing it now, he'd have to say, hello, we're at war. It's going to be quite long. You're all involved. Good luck. He'd have to really compress it down to keep everyone's attention. Sorry to try and make a bit of humor out of that, but I'm just trying to make a point, not say it wasn't important. So attention spans are really depressed. When I'm saying that people have left the room, it means when someone leaves the room, it doesn't mean they've dropped off. It means their attention has gone. Their attention has gone. Their attention has gone. I recently did a large piece of work last year for a very large consulting firm. It's one of the top ones, so you'll appreciate me not saying their name. And we did some polls and some sort of questionnaires where people didn't have to give their identity, because we were trying to understand communication. And the amount of people that confirmed they had actually stayed on the call but had left the room before the end, it was incredible. The figure said 62% of people left the room at the 22-minute mark. So I'm not saying they're doing that to you, but I do think you shouldn't ignore that. And then you've got people get information overload on webcam calls much earlier than they do in the room. I think the reason for that is that when you're in you're physically in a room running a meeting, you've got all those cues, you've got all those bits of body language that you can read. The relationship in the room, you can develop a relationship much more quickly in a room than you can through a webcam. Soft skills are very hard to deliver through a webcam. Bringing people into the meeting, getting them engaged with it. it doesn't feel like information overload because there's so much going on in the room that keeps people's attention. The reason people feel information overload is because they get disengaged very, very early on. And the fourth thing is time management on webcam meetings. It's very easy to run out of time. Very, very easy, which is why, Sandra, I'm constantly looking away at my clock as well. So that's, if you're going to present the great information at the end, that's the risk that you have. That's the risk that you have. So what we need to be aware of is this, and you'll be very impressed that I can pronounce this. Daniel Kahneman. Yeah, that's impressive. That's with a South African accent. Daniel Kahneman. It's called the peak end rule, and Daniel Kahneman came up with this. And when you're thinking of your meetings, whether it's one-on-one, one-on-two, two-on-one, two-on-two, or more than 4, think about the peak end rule. Think about this. Now, meetings go up and down. So I've just put in here, positive is up and negative is down. And you can see on this particular meeting, there's some heavy downtime, probably because there's a lot of deadlines being suggested at the end, reminders of everyone's got to pull together, all that kind of stuff, which through a camera sounds quite negative. And what Daniel Kahneman says is that people remember the peaks and the end, the peaks and the end, the peaks and the end. Now, I think this is really worth considering because I'm involved in a lot of business development, and we used to put a lot of emphasis on the icebreaker at the start, putting a really good icebreaker in the first 5 minutes to get everyone on side, and it could include humor, small talk, whatever it is. It would be there, and that would get the room off to a good vibe. Through the camera, that just does not get remembered. It's confetti. It doesn't have any impact. What people will remember is that Q&A at the end where someone asked a really difficult question, or they'll remember in their perception what was the worst feature of the meeting you've just held. So don't dismiss Daniel Kahneman. He did get a Nobel Prize, and this concept of the peak end rule, it's all over webcam communication, I can assure you. Q&A, this is about meetings, and everyone kind of focused on the bigger meetings. Well, we found with the research that we did with Barclays and C40i that there's a big risk in your meeting. If you do a Q&A at the end, this is what can happen. Now, I'm going to do a Q&A in a minute, so we'll just see how that plays out. But yeah. It sounds a lot worse through a webcam. The only thing, and again, I'll use politicians from every side of the house. None of them, for whatever reason, answer questions. I think that's just, maybe that's the job description of a politician. I don't know. Key requisite, don't answer questions. But it sounds even worse. It sounds even worse when you've kind of got a camera on you. It just sounds so evasive. So you may get a question you can't answer, and that'll look terrible at the end of your meeting. Remember that thing about time? You might get a question at the end that generates a negative discussion. You got 2 or 3 people on the call discussing negatively all the content that you've just shared. Do you want to be exposed to that? And then you've got this. Yeah. I consulted not last year, the year before. Not anyone in Hull or the north of England. So let's just say that with a London-based company, and there was a guy there, and man, could that guy come up with some questions. I could answer them as well, which is not a problem, but it disrupted the end of the meeting that much because the questions were about minutiae. Now, I couldn't dodge that bullet because the managing partner of that business hosted the Q&A, and it was almost like it was open house to ask who could, come up with the most irrelevant question, and this guy won it hands down. So through a webcam, do you want the risk of an irrelevant question at the end of your meeting? Do you want the risk of a negative discussion at the end of your meeting? Do you want to be asked something you cannot ask effectively when all of us are exposed to the peak end rule? So I think you've got to micromanage how you're going to deal with that. You've got to micromanage how you're going to deal with that. Now, what I'm going to do, Sadia, I'm going to go back to the quiz. I feel better about the quiz. And let's just go back here. So at this point, we've got the chat box open. Are there any questions before we start getting into, okay, well, that's set the scene. How are we going to do this? Are there any questions there? Because although I said, be careful with Q&As, I'm about to hold one. So go for it. Any questions at this point? Like it looks like I've covered everything so far, Sadia, which is cool. I'm cool with covering everything so far. Okay. Before I do the quiz then, let's have a little bit further look down the line. So let me just go forward a little bit. Okay. Now, you know I like to recommend material. You know that. So here's the second one. Yeah. So not just Professor Marabian. No, not just Professor Marabian. This one's okay. Yeah, I came across Kevin Hall about 10 years ago. And this actually isn't a book about webcam meetings. So neither's Mehrabian's book either. But you can use that material in the context of a webcam call, and you can use it as a toolkit. Before anyone asks, no, I haven't written any books. I've got no intention to. I write a blog, but I don't write books. But this one's pretty cool. I think the best bit about this, and you can see it across the cover there, is accelerating decisions. And so let's have a little look at this. But this is something, I think you can get it as a Kindle version as well. So that's something I would suggest. Consider it. So this is what these guys came up with back in 2007. Wow, 2007. Those were the days, 2007. Those were the days. And that's what people were doing in 2007. And Kevin Hall was a consultant, and he was just doing research around the impact of webcam calls in large companies. I think actually he was consulting for Deutsche Bank, but I wouldn't swear to that. I wouldn't swear to that. And I don't think there's anyone from Deutsche Bank on the call to deny this. So there you are. But that's what's going on. And I could quite easily believe those levels. Busy people, a granular meeting, lots of different points on a meeting. You don't have to get involved in every point, and everybody in Deutsche Bank's really busy. Well, you know, what do you expect? You can probably find the paper that he wrote about distraction levels. It's not as good as the book. I'll mark your card. It's very much a scholar's perception of it, but it's cool. But definitely, if you're looking to improve how you come across in meetings or how you set meetings up, it's got to be worth looking at. It's got to be worth looking at. So these are the general distractions. Now, I don't think any of that's a surprise to anyone on this call. I really don't. I don't think there's anyone on this call that's thinking, oh, man, when I'm on a webcam call, I'm on DEFCON 3. I'm on DEFCON 3. Nothing gets through to me when I'm on a webcam call. Nothing. Not one single distraction. I'm focused, laser focused. Well, maybe you are then. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I shouldn't have said that on the call. But everyone's so busy, and we've got like, what's the word here? FOMO, fear of missing out. FOMO, fear of missing out. So we're distracted all day long anyway. And most of us are used to being distracted and kind of multitasking. So people do this. You wouldn't do it in a client meeting. I mean, I wouldn't when I was, sitting with a client in Barclays Bank when I was a younger guy. I wouldn't just sit there and go, look, I'm listening to you. Let me just take this to a text. Let me just take this. Yeah, but I am listening to you. Oh, hang on. I've got an email. I'm listening. You can keep talking to me in this meeting. Well, I don't think you do it for very long. And as for doing that in a boardroom, can you imagine that? I'd like to listen, but I just need to look at my tablet. So no, this has become a really big feature of webcam calls. I'm going to show you some ideas on how to disrupt this disruption. Do you like that? Disrupt the disruption. Yeah, you see, disrupt the disruption. These are other things. Webcam. So yeah, when I say you don't know who's on the call, I mean, there's a couple of things there. One is sometimes people don't register in their real name. And I think that when we come to what to do about this, you've got to have part of your protocol that people do register in their actual professional name. I was on a call on Thursday. It was a software call, and somebody came on the call. I don't believe it was their name, but it was Sexy Eyes, which I'm guessing, you know, she probably had, but it's not a good starting point for coming onto a call about a software implementation program. So yeah, so you've got the thing that sometimes folk don't come onto a call and they've logged on in their actual professional name, or you don't actually know what their job description is, or who they are when they're on the call, or what they are in relation to the call. Now you might say, well, why not do a round robin before the call? But then you're kind of back to that earlier slide. You're not really in control of that. So one of the things is sometimes that when you do a round robin, can everyone introduce themselves? It may take me 10 seconds to introduce myself, but the next person, it might take 2 minutes. And the person after that may be very shy and not say too much, whereas the next person along can talk for 2 minutes about what they're about. So even that doesn't help you. So that's a problem. Not knowing who should actually be talking during the call, that's a problem. It's not always clear. Someone can put a question out on a webcam call and who should pick it up. And then you've got the other thing, when everybody gets into, oh, what's happening? Got a bit of action there. I think we've got someone on the call and their microphones on, and if that could be succumbed, that would be a treat. Yeah. So not always knowing who should be speaking. Yeah, and not being able to get a word in. That's a good one, because if you actually say, well, let's just open this up. Oh boy, through a webcam, that's terrible. That's terrible. Not everyone's got the same bandwidth, so you might get audio bounce, calls dip in and out. It would probably sound a bit like Apollo 13 when that guy's going, Houston, we have a problem, and it all kicks off. So yeah, that's a problem. So you need to organize to make sure everyone gets a word in. And then you got this one, which is a classic. Yeah, I had one of these last week. There was 9 people on the call, and I was the lead on the call, and there was 3 of us and 6 of them. And I asked a closing question, and nobody answered. And on a webcam call, honestly, you might say, well, was that some kind of silent close, Bob? No, it wasn't. It wasn't a sales call. It was just, I was just trying to find out who's going to pick this up. Nobody wanted to kind of jump in. And the general comms on a webcam call, you've typically got variations of that problem. So we're going to address that. Follow through. All the research says that you can have a very dynamic webcam call, and the actions from it are less. It's easier not to own actions. Follow throughs reduce because it's not always quite clear what's supposed to happen. And then who actually owns the follow through is reduced as well. So all the research is these are all symptoms of a bad meeting, and a webcam call makes this happen even more. So when I'm talking about things to do, these are the things that I'm addressing. This isn't, oh, it would be nice. These are actually things I'm addressing. And the other thing, now this came from 2 other people. As you can see, that looks like a well-known guy, J.R. Spence. That's me, Bob Spence, well-known to myself, I suppose. And that was with Katarzyna Lanucha, Kasia Lanucha. And we did some terrific stuff with the United Kingdom Department of International Trade. And I'm hoping we will do this year. And Kasia, for the record, she is a lecturer at Cambridge University, and she does cross-cultural studies, but she's also a bit of a, I'd call her a communications guru, very, very good on communication skills. And we were examining trust levels. Now, to have a good webcam meeting, you need high levels of trust. And we've got a few things that might disrupt that at the moment. I can't say how the pandemic's impacting you, but it is impacting on people. There is economic security, so on a call, that could have some kind of impact. I think it's not to say that people on calls discuss politics, but there is an amount of polarization in the background, misinformation, and it's all uncertainty of what's going on. So you can't really compensate that with soft skills through a call. You cannot. You can assume that when someone comes on a call that they're affected by these things. And I think it would be sensible to assume that when people come on a call, they're all affected in some way or other by this in different ways. So their own performance, if they're home-based workers, it's bound to be prejudiced by the personal impact of these. And it's quite difficult to create that small talk where you can get a handle on where people are. We used to, back in South Africa and Hong Kong, have things called water cooler moments. I don't know what they're called in Hull. I don't even think we've got a water cooler in Hull. Maybe we have. Maybe I'm doing Hull a disservice. But at a water cooler, you could say, how you doing? What's happening? What do you make of this? Water cooler moments are informal conversations in a formal setting. And they kind of lubricate the trust levels. So because that lubrication has been diminished considerably, it comes out on the webcam call as well. And we call it an empathy deficit. Look at that, a new word, empathy deficit. Where do these words keep coming from? I'm convinced that there's somebody, while this pandemic's going on, let's make up some new things. An empathy deficit is one of them. It's one of them. And what it basically means is this. It's levels of trust. Now, if you take a meeting goes from left to right, it starts and it ends. And we know that when we have a high level of trust in somebody, then the meeting goes better when we're hearing information from them. And when it's the other way around, that's better too. And what would happen historically, we could build up our bank account of trust through water cooler moments. But what's happening at the moment is it's kind of oscillating because our relationships kind of dip into where we were face to face. They then dip out into what it's like through a camera. And as the meeting goes from start to end, the level of trust, it's going up and down. And while we're doing this, we're fighting to keep people interested. Now you can see here, there's two poles, one going up, which is the interest level, and the one going to the right, which is relevance. Now, to build up interest levels, to engage people, you've got to make sure the content of what you're talking about is highly relevant to them. I'll give you an example of this. So just roll with this. For what it's worth, I sell business development software. Okay. And that software, it's for legal practices. Okay. So I'm doing business development for legal practices through a webcam. I can see some of you going, what a joy. What joy. But that's what I'm doing. It's why I look so cheerful and enthusiastic and whatever. But that's what I do. And we had a classic example of raising interest levels through something that 99% of the time would be irrelevant. And I'll tell you what happened. We were on a call late on a Wednesday afternoon to a legal firm in Los Angeles, Okay. So it's first thing in the morning for them. It's the tail end of the afternoon for myself, Alexandra, and Cooper. Cooper's in Wrocław, so he's even an hour later. And this is what I did. At the start of the call, I could see, because we'd connected up through LinkedIn. We'd done that LinkedIn thing we have to do these days. And I could see that the guy I was talking to was also part of something that meant that he was a surfer. He was a surfer. Now, I'm a surfer. That's righty. So what happened at the start of the call, because I thought these calls are terrible as it is, let's just try something a little bit out there. I put at the start of the call, it's great to meet you at last, Eric. Eric, if you don't mind, I just caught up that you're a member of the Huntington Beach team. You're part of the Lifesavers. And he goes, well, yeah. Wow. Well, I used to be a member of Lifesavers Durban, and we paired with Lifesavers Huntington, and we had a competition against you. It's a few years back then, but I'm guessing we were the same vintage. Now, that's kind of, you could say, well, how interesting was that for everyone else? I would say 0, but it was highly interesting for the managing partner. And because we'd got that kind of held his interest talking about surfing, which is highly relevant to him, we were able to actually construct some kind of trust through the call. And the most bizarre thing, and I don't mind saying it on here because I know there's no one on this call from Los Angeles, because you'd be up at 2 in the morning or whatever. I would say probably one of the worst tech presentations Cooper's ever done. If I'd been in a room, I'd be kicking him under the table to have sped up. But surprisingly, one of the best outcomes. So I think when it comes to communicating your value, all bets are off, and you've got to start thinking about, well, how do I become relevant to somebody? How do I become relevant to somebody other than what we do? How do I become relevant? I can't be that relevant to the managing partner of a massive LA law firm by being a software vendor. I could become relevant when we start talking about, well, what's the backlift like on Seal Beach? I'm pretty sure his HR lead was holding her head in her hands as we were burning through the first 10 minutes. But you've got to rethink how you're communicating with people. All right, I'll come off surfing. I can already see some Zs. I'll come off surfing. All right. You can see I get really enthused when I talk about surfing. So let's have a look. So this is what you need to consider before I break it down into the 1-on-1, the 1-to-2, the 2-to-1, the 2-to-2, and the 4, right? So start off thinking about this. Yeah. Before you set up a meeting, and this will impact on the bigger meetings, consider, is there any potential for conflict? So just do a SWOT. I'm sure everyone on this call can do that. Just do a quick SWOT. This is a call we've got organized. One of the weaknesses is, what's the potential for conflict? Now, I don't mean conflict, people have a blazing row on a call. All right, I'll just chuck something out there. Okay, if you've got a procurement officer on a call and an operations manager on a call, there's potential for conflict. A good operations manager is going to argue for what makes the operation work more fluidly, and he's quite right to do that, or she's quite right to do that. The procurement person there is going to be talking the language of budgets, timeframes, SLAs. The operational's going to talk about deliverables. You've got it. I know you've got it. So when I'm talking about conflict, I'm not necessarily talking about, two people are going to have a blazing row over something, but I'm marking your card as we go into how do you prep. That's one of the prep points. Second thing is, does the meeting require in-depth interaction? Now, the answer to both of those, and again, I'm grateful for the time I spent with Katarzyna Lanucha. If there's potential of conflict between the participants, break that into separate calls. absolutely break it through into separate call. If there's a requirement or someone on the call has a requirement for in-depth interaction, break them out of the call and take it separately, because you just won't make up the yards using the webcam. You won't. And I don't know if you've been on a call where people disagree, but when people disagree on a webcam, boy, it sounds 10 times worse. It really does sound worse. Start to think about the needs of the attendees before you work out who you're going to invite. Cultures, I'm not talking about South African and Australians discussing rugby. I'm talking about millennial, Generation Z. I'm talking about, it could be the tech department on the same call as the compliance department. That's always a good laugh. If you get a compliance team on a call with tech developers, yeah, just drop a match and watch it burn. Yeah, start to think, are these cultures going to work? Are they going to function in this call? Is there something I need to do differently? Is there something? Is a mixed culture call appropriate for more than 4 people? For example, I would say no. Without all the facts, I would say no. Avoid it, because there's just a chance it's not going to work out. Some people on a call need to engage. What I've been finding, I've been doing a lot of inductions for legal firms. Some of the lawyers who are terrific lawyers, without doubt, their IT skills are not that strong. I mean, why would they be? You don't, when you hire a lawyer, say, oh, your tech skills pretty good. So they need far more engagement than the personal assistants and the secretaries on the same call who use IT all day long. So you got to think, well, is that the right mix of people on a call? Should I mix it up a bit? Should I say, well, the paralegals and the secretaries, let's do one call for them and a one call for the lawyers. Try and think about, how can I break the groups up, or do I need to break the groups up? If there's a need for creativity, as you're aware, I'm involved in a software company, and the software developers are in Wrocław, and I'm sat here in Hull. Sometimes the call needs to be really creative, but we've got people on the call that are not creative, and I'll put my hand up. I'm not creative. No sirree, I know I'm not. So, do I need to be on this call? Can I add any value to a creative call? If it does need to be a creative call, do you need somebody to manage the framework of that creativity? Do you need somebody to say, look, we want you to be creative, but within this framework, within this sandbox? And is there a need to be innovative? Because again, when you want people to be innovative, it's all right saying let's have a blue sky moment, but you don't want people going off completely everywhere, and it's much more difficult to pull people back on a webcam call. So those are considerations to consider. I mean, you're going to get these slides, but these are the things to consider before you decide the number of people on the call. You got to do it that way around. You got to think, what are all the variables about this meeting? And I'm sure if you read the book of Kevin Hall, can we run this meeting differently? Because that's the question, isn't it? I accept that you're not always in charge of the size of the group. I mean, we had one where 9 people were on the call, which I told you it would have been better if there'd been 4, but it wasn't our meeting. And then you need to think about the preparation. Now we're getting into it. We've got time, Sadia, on bang on time. What are the needs regarding the purpose of this meeting? What does the purpose of this meeting need? Well, the first thing, it's going to need a clear purpose, a clear objective, and you need to decide what could a good meeting look like? What could a good meeting look like? What could it look like? What could it look like before we prepare? What could it look like? Okay. So, bam, 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 bam. There we go. We've got the 1-to-1, the 1-to-2, and the 2-to-1. So, these calls are where you can use these tools. These calls are where you can use these tools. Because it's a smaller meeting. You can use pre-planned small talk. Pre-planned small talk might be something like, I'm in Hull, how are things down in London? You know, I know that's not exactly, you know, the greatest small talk you've ever heard, but that's okay. I've got them talking about London. We've broken the ice. They may be talking to me, well, still not using the underground at the moment, and EC1's ghost town. And I went to Notting Hill Gate and there was 2 people there, you know, but that's okay with a small group. It's okay. You've broken the ice with small talk. And I would suggest if you've got a 1-on-2, a 1-to-1, or a 2-to-1, I'd prepare a couple of small talk comments. I'd probably not talk about the pandemic too much, but that's your shout. The agenda can be much more flexible because it's such a small group, but I definitely use a storytelling style of interaction. And Sadia, I've covered storytelling selling, so it's not for salespeople, but think about the narrative, the way you engage people. To engage a smaller group, you can explain things through a story. You can use visuals, use a lot of examples, anecdotes. I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm doing a conference with the British Embassy in Bucharest, and that was a 1-on-1 call. And she told me her story, how she started working for the embassy. I told her my story, how I was connected to her. I shared a visual about what it was we were trying to do. I gave her some examples of what that could mean to a Romanian company. I gave her some anecdotes. She gave me some anecdotes. And then we worked out how to involve each other. It's that kind of thing. But I'm guessing by the answers earlier, this isn't the big one. It's the bigger number of people. A 2-on-2. The thing with a 2-on-2, you definitely need an agenda. Don't go 2-on-2 without an agenda. Definitely have an agenda. And what I would do is with the agenda, have the names of the 4 people on there, and I would include their LinkedIn profile. I would include their LinkedIn profile and job description or job title. So it might sound a call, Bob Spence, co-founder, onboarding lead. Then underneath it will say Alexandra Gora, CEO, development lead. And then it might say the managing partner of the legal firm, Tom Doe, his HR director, Jane Doe. And then we've got their links. Because with the agenda, we don't want to do the round robin of can everyone introduce ourselves. It gets a bit granular. It's hard to keep it constrained. And with busy people, we've got that 45-minute barrier. Do you remember that from the start? 45 minutes is the max. If you knock off 5 minutes for the intro and 5 minutes for the action points, you've got 35 minutes to play. And if you're going to present anything, you've got 9 minutes. So we really are against the clock. Keep all faces visible. Have that in the agenda. And try and get the chat box engaged if you can. So you could start off on the call and say, just testing the chat box, testing 1, 2, 3. Can everybody put in testing 1, 2, 3? As we go along, can we put questions into the chat box? Can we do that rather than raise hands or interrupt? And then you need some ground rules for the meeting. Now, you don't have to use all of these, but that's what I would send out, a ground rule sheet. What I've discovered myself in this era, if you publish, so if I emailed out, this is the agenda, this is who's on the call, these are some ground rules. We have these ground rules because in our experience, it makes the call work better. No one's come back to me and said, I don't want the call to work better. You know where you can stick your ground rules. Let's just all jump on a call and just waste 45 minutes. No one said that to me yet, but it's possible. So it's this kind of thing. They don't have to be the rules of your call, but it could be that. Mute when not speaking. Agree how the actions are going to be recorded. Just agree in advance via email. You don't want to be using up time on your call to work out who's doing that. Just basic stuff. How the action is going to be followed through. Email that out beforehand so that when you jump on the call, we've already got ground rules. If it's an internal call, you may say, well, we know each other. We don't need to state our name. All right. But if there's only 2 of you that know each other and the other 2 don't, okay, here we go. And I'm watching the time, Sadia. I know I've got 15 minutes. All right, here it is. We know that it's more than 4 people. And this is where it gets a lot. Now, you've got to use the tools from the previous slides, but now we need this. We need clarity. So the first thing is, I would suggest you have a 45-minute agenda and you put timings. So let's say the call started at 1400. You might say 1400 to 1410, introduction. 1410 through to 1420, presentation of reorganization or whatever it is. But just make it very clear there's timings on an agenda, because when there's timings on an agenda, you can constantly pull the meeting back to the agenda. Nominate someone to make the notes, because if you're trying to run the meeting yourself, don't run the meeting and try and take the notes. See, what happens is this. Let me show you what it looks like. Now, you probably notice on this call, I am looking into the camera. So I'm not actually looking, I can see my slide, but I'm looking at the camera. I'm doing this. And the reason I'm doing that is because of this. I've got this underneath the screen, and this is above. So I've got arrows forcing me to point into the webcam. Now, if I'm the person making the notes, the call goes like this. Right, well, thank you for that, Sadia. I'll just make a note of that. Okay, that's point number 1, and we'll come back to point 2. Right, so where were we on the call? Okay, can you see what's happened? I've just put in 60 seconds of disruptive padding, and there's no need. If I said on the call, Sadia is the scribe on our call. Sadia will be recording action points. She will record the decisions that we make, and she will circulate the minutes afterwards. So that's Sadia at Winning Moves. I don't have to actually engage with anything apart from my engagement with you. So definitely have someone responsible for it, who's not on the call, who's not engaged in the call, who's not responsible for the call, who hasn't got a stake in the call. Just someone to write down a clear synopsis of who said what was said, that you've got a clear minute, but it's not you. You just focus on what's going on. I would also consider nominating a facilitator. A facilitator is responsible for keeping the technology going. On this call, we've got Sadia, who's done a terrific job from Winning Moves. She's the facilitator. She's keeping the technology moving along. You might want to use a polling system. Now, there's different ones. I don't want to get too much into technology, but sometimes you need to know whether to speed up or slow down. What you can do, and what I do, is when I email an agenda, say that every 10 minutes, I will ask, can we speed up or should we slow down? Should we speed up or shall we slow down? You've got to think 45 minutes. So the first 5 minutes is preamble, and then we're in. Then I've got 3 units of 10 minutes to get my point across, and then we're going to be closing off. So I would be looking at some kind of system to take the pulse of the group throughout. Little bits of interaction, and I'll show you what I mean. Shout outs. Like a shout out, let's have just a look. I'll show you what a shout out is. Okay, well, I think this is a moment where it probably makes a lot of sense to get some input from Denisa Brighton. Great to see you on the call, Denisa. Perhaps we should have some input from you. And I can also say, hey, it's great that we've got Trish McClay from Barclays Bank on the call from Scotland. I hope things are going well up there. That's a shout out. It's just dropping people's names into the call as you go along. I mean, don't do it like that. It's like a DJ at a Christmas party or something. No, you do it in a better style than that. That's the point. I mean, so I might say, okay, this could this point here is probably a good point that we've got Barclays Bank on the call. This is probably a good point for Barclays Bank to just share with us their perspective on it. And I see we've got Trish on the call, just to work out in advance a couple of, I call them shout outs, which is a Southern Hemisphere thing. So that might not be the right Northern Hemisphere language, but just have it in the call that when you break up those units of 10 minutes, you are going to pull other people into the call. I mean, pull them in for things they can, you know, talk about. Don't pull them in on something that's irrelevant. But once you start doing that, the likelihood of getting disengagement becomes less because you're getting other people to contribute. And what you want is people to feel comfortable to contribute. So at the end, when you're wrapping the call up, you've had enough connectivity to get a result. So what I'd like to do, if it's all right, Sadia, is go back to that quiz earlier. I didn't realize my slides moved around that much. Good grief. I was pressing the animation button, Sadia, and I think I got carried away. I like the look of it. Thought, hey, let's do another one. Let's do another one. Let's put another one here. That'll look good. You see what happens when you've got time on your hands. Okay, we're nearly there. Righty. So we're looking at menti.com. All right, menti.com, and let's move all this across. Let's move all this across, Sadia. So I'm just waiting to fire it up. It's exciting, all this, isn't it? What did we do before Mentimeter? I don't know. So let's just let's get this. It's all right, Sadia. I'm just moving it across. I've got 3 screens here. It looks a bit like the set for the Bourne Convention, you know, those guys that were tracking him down had screens everywhere. Okay, well that's a quick result. So there you go, 33, 98, 17, 15. Let's see what people, just to get a feel for how important this could be. Yeah, right. You know, I was on one first thing this morning, so I'm at today as well. Okay, it's just interesting. I'm just you can see that on this already, the vast majority of people that are on this have already been on a call today. So the webcam, if I go right back to the start, that you know, telephone technique is a thing. Written correspondence is a thing. One-to-one meetings are a thing, and meetings where there's a group of people and you're running the meeting are a thing. Then this is a thing as well. I thoroughly recommend that you have a look at the works of Professor Morabian. I can't see Netflix turning it into a movie, but I don't think it was written as a screenplay. So let's get this a little bit along. But it'll give you some thoughts around what people take in, when there's not body language to cue into, and I think it's a big consideration. So let's try it. Let's just see if there's a Q&A. Is there a Q&A to be had? That's the question, Sadia, before I go on to the next slides. Is there any questions? You can unmic yourself, chuck it out there, even if you want to talk about surfboards. I have known. I'm happy. Sorry, Denisa. I didn't mean to nearly give you a heart attack. But any questions there? Well, if I just go back the slides a little bit, I would be using most of this for the larger meetings. I would. Make sure that a larger meeting has to be more purpose-driven than a smaller one. Try and look for, in a larger meeting, that will stand out more. And a larger meeting that will stand out more. So always be looking at ways of reducing the size of the meeting if you're the lead and if you're able to, because all of these things are real issues in a live meeting, let alone through a webcam. But think about, do we need this number of people on the call? If you are going to use pre-planned small talk, make sure it's there. You've already got it in advance. So it could be, we've got some people on the call from London. How are things going on in London? Make sure it's very short and sharp, and a couple of people can pick it up. Make sure you're using storytelling, selling, anecdotes, examples. Send the agenda out. And then this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting. If you don't lay out ground rules, don't be surprised if there aren't any. Now you're into this. Timings. Put the timings on an agenda. Have someone separate taking the notes. Nominate a chair. Nominate a facilitator. Use a polling system. Do take it. Nominate a chair. And so I think I'm going to wrap this up then, if that's all right, Sadia. So this is what we've got cooking. ICT. Look at that.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was a great webinar, and I hope everybody agrees and has found this useful. I was quiet throughout, but yes, listening very intently. Some great content there. So thank you again for your time, Bob, and for everybody who's joined us. We've had a couple of comments in the chat box as well to thank you, Bob, saying, you know, they've really enjoyed the session, and it was great. So thank you for those comments. I just have a couple of things before we close the webinar, please. There's some dates on your screen at the moment for upcoming webinars. There's many more being planned in March as well, and hopefully there might be some beyond. So do look out for those and register your interest on Eventbrite as you did for this one, and you'll receive a link to join. I'm also going to launch a poll shortly. It only requires 1 minute of your time, and we run it as a general poll at the end of all webinars to understand how you found the webinar and how we might be able to improve webinars going forward. Before I launch that poll, just want to mention the Digital Catalyst programme, which Winning Moves are also involved in on behalf of the council. It's a free business support programme for businesses in the Humber region, and for those who are eligible, it means that you can receive support from an expert in the digital sector, and they can speak to you one-to-one to identify where your digital needs might be, where your business is at the moment, where you might be able to improve things, or what sort of assistance you would like. So it might be that you say you'd like some support, for example, in improving how you do your finances, making that more digital. So we can find the right expert for you. We have lots of experts working with us with various experience in lots of different areas in digital, as I say. So there'll be someone for everyone, in effect. The projects are wide ranging, and they really are led by you as to where your business is and where you would want the support. So the way the Digital Catalyst programme works, you'd register, complete a registration form, your eligibility would be checked and confirmed, and from there you'd be put in touch with the expert advisor, and your one-to-one support would start. They take you through a digital benchmark index to understand where you are digitally. Then they take you through at least a minimum 9 hours of one-to-one support, and at the end of that leave you with an action plan of what you can do next. And also there's a brokerage opportunity for them to refer you to other places that you can get further support. If you want to know more about it, there is a slide in here that's got the details of how you can contact us for further information and how you can find out more. So I will share these slides with all that are on this call today. So feel free to get in touch with us with any questions about Digital Catalyst. We'll be more than happy to answer. But I'd really just like to say, in a nutshell, it's a free programme for businesses, really beneficial. It's a really good opportunity to get involved and get some support. So do take a look at that and get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box and I can respond now, or Bob could, if it's a question for Bob could respond now, or feel free to get in touch with me on those contact details that are on the screen later if you wish to do so, if you think of anything else. On that note,